Okay, what's one thing you believed early in your career, but now you no longer do?
That's a very good question, actually. Early in my career.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Scholars Table. On this episode, we are honored to welcome Professor Albert Hofman, who is the chair of the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. School of Public Health, one of the leading institutions in public health education. Professor Hofman is a Stephen B.K. Family Professor of Public Health and Clinical Epidemiology. He brings decades of global leadership in shaping epidemiologic research, training the next generation of scholars, and directing groundbreaking academic institutions across 2 continents. Before joining Harvard, he served as the chair of the Department of Epi at Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands and was a founding science director of the Netherlands Institute for Health Sciences. In this episode, we are exploring the future of epidemiology, the impact of the recent funding cuts, and the real criteria behind graduate admission at Harvard, and how academic institutions must evolve to meet the next generation of public health leaders. So stay tuned. This one's for the thinkers, builders, and bold voices of tomorrow. Professor Hofman, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate finding the time to be on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure, Doc. Please.
Thank you so much. So I usually like to begin by understanding the background of our guests and reading through your profile. You seem to have a very unique experience both in Europe and now in the US. Can you walk us through briefly about your maybe academic journey and what first drew you into epidemiology?
Yes, thank you very much for asking. It's a great pleasure, as I said, to be with you. And I'm an MD in the Netherlands, my home country, and I'm still a Dutch national. And I specialized in internal medicine, but relatively immediately after that, I went into clinical epidemiology. And I must say, I have not regretted it at all. It's a great place to be. So it combines basically the various aspects of epidemiology. On the one hand, the focus on public health, but on the other hand, also the importance for clinical medicine. So the combination there is of great interest to me. And as you said, I've been for quite a number of years the chair in the Department of Epidemiology of the Erasmus Medical Center, which is in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. But I was that after I had been for a number of years at the Harvard School of Public Health as a fellow with Olli Mietinen. Many people see him as one of the real founders of modern epidemiology, and it was a great pleasure and really quite a brain-teasing experience to be with Dr. Mietinen. I went back to the Netherlands and became the chair of the department and built it up over a number of years, and then about now 10 years ago, I permanently came back to Harvard. I had been teaching a summer course since 1995 in Boston, so I was familiar with the environment, but of course, to be a chair here is different from being an instructor in a course. So it is a great and new experience. People, of course, very often ask, is there a big difference between the continents in this sense? And the answer is, in terms of epidemiology, actually, no. There is both in Europe and also certainly in the US an upsurge in epidemiology, not only through the pandemic, also before that already, in terms of the methods development. And I do not see a real big difference. Perhaps the American attitude is a bit more having a sense of urgency. Now it has to be now and let's get there. But I think it's the best way to think in these terms is to do it. If you look at these 2 continents, think of it strengthening each other. And of course, there are now other countries upcoming very much. I think Japan, of course, already is there for quite a number of years, but China and also India, there's an upsurge in interest in epidemiology. Of course, that's not natural, perhaps directly, because the first build-up is generally in medicine, and then our governments see the importance of population approach and public health, and you see that now in many countries, I think, in the world. And epidemiology plays, in my view, a very important role in that. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that highlight. And you did say that being a chair, especially at Harvard, is different. As the chair of the Epi department, department, what would you say it's like your strategic vision for the department in the next 5 to 10 years, looking at where the field is currently?
Well, the overall terms that I always use for this is a chair, and it applies to deans as well, should not be heard too much. In terms of the research portfolio, I think it's very, very much a matter of doing it bottom up. People, good scientists, epidemiologists most certainly can decide for themselves in what direction they want to go. So, of course, there is a bit of a role of leadership in terms of department or a school of public health or a medical school. It is in terms of perhaps the education program that there can be a bit more top-down attitude. And what the strengths and the streams are follows basically the developments in epidemiology. And we try very much to strengthen that in our methods group. Causal lab in the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard School of Public Health is, I think, particularly strong already for many, many years, since indeed Professor Mietinen. And the development in, on the one hand, emulating clinical trials using observational data is a strong approach. On the other hand, or next to that, the instrumental variable development, Mendelian randomization, but also in the broader sense, the use of instrumental variables, I think, very important, and we follow that. But in addition, in the Department of Epidemiology at Harvard, we have a very strong group in mental health developed over the past 20, 30 years now. We have classically, since the founder of the department, Professor McMahon, a very strong cancer epidemiology group, and certainly in infectious diseases during the pandemic, the department played an important role, particularly in modeling of epidemics, and in that particular case, COVID-19.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I know you've mentioned a few priority areas, but what would you say, in the emergence of AI and other artificial intelligence models, what would you say are the emerging topics or methods in EPI that you believe will define the next decade of epidemiology?
Well, it's the ones that I just mentioned. Basically, approaches to causal inference. AI or big data is a very interesting prediction type of approach. And we know this quite well, of course, since the 70s, the 60s, I should say, even of the last century. The first big data approaches have been developed on the basis, amongst others, of the Framingham Heart Study. And so that is not so new for us. What is very, very important is to see whether this prediction approach can be linked to a causal inference approach, whether we can have a more mechanistic approach to this. And that is one of the, I think, the big developments, has to be one of the big developments of also AI in link to epidemiology and medicine at large. How can we make it not only as a predictive or a prognostic technique, but can we draw causal conclusions on this? In medicine, of course, we cannot have the luxury of saying that causes are too difficult. This is what very many philosophers say, of course, but we don't have that luxury because we have to know a cause in terms of reasonable intervention, and even in understanding of diseases, we need to focus on the causal approaches and the causal inference. And that, I think, linking that to the AI techniques, the wonderful development in there, is very, very important. Linked to that is also the harvesting of the big data sets that we have, and do that in an appropriate way using electronic health records. For example, we have them, of course, very, very much, but it is not a sinecure. It is not so simple to use them well, and therefore that will be, I think, a very important development as well, related also into the emulating of the observational data from, for example, electronic health records in target trial approaches.
So, part of my community, it's mainly public health professionals and also prospective applicants who are looking to advance their career in public health. So I want us to talk a bit about the funding cuts and how that is impacting graduate training. How has been the impact impact of the funding cuts in, for example, in the admissions process and the opportunities that are available for public health applicants. I know some institutions, they've cut down the numbers that they are admitting for the year. There are even some programs that are not admitting any students at all, especially for their PhD programs. How is the funding cuts impacting the processes at your department?
Well, in terms of the number of applications, that is, for the master program is quite stable. It's a bit down for our PhD programs, but yeah, we have such an overload of applicants that it is particularly important to have a very good pool, and I think we have that. We had a very big surge during the pandemic in the number of applicants for our PhD program, and that is after that a bit down, but now it's stabilizing. The effect of budget cuts, the more specific one addressed at Harvard, but also particularly the possible putative budget cuts in the NIH budget, estimated to be over 40% of the budget, will be really very detrimental, not only for epidemiologic research, of course, but for biomedical, medical research, basic research in many senses, very, very much. If that is combined to a reduction also in other federal sources, for example, the Department of Defense having less funds, the National Academy of Medicine or the National Academy's funding going down, that will be most certainly have very, very strong and negative influences. And we see that also, I think, in the attitude of our young colleagues. It is basically for the first time in a number of 30, 40 years that I see now that quite a number of really very talented young colleagues go into other areas, not in academia, but go into industry, pharma, of course, but also other areas. And that is in itself good, but previously the real talented ones in the sense of methods development stayed in academia. And I think that may be changing, and that will be in the longer run really quite a detrimental, not only for epidemiology, but my position is that of a clinical epidemiologist, and I see epidemiology, as we often say, the queen science for public health, but I see it also as one of the really founding sciences and disciplines for clinical medicine, and therefore that will be on both ends, there will be impact, and that will not be positive of what we see now in terms of funding.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I mean, recently, most of the PhD students I know who are graduating, over 50%, are thinking of going outside of the academic institutions because of restrictions and the cuts that are happening. So I want us to talk a little bit about the admissions process and let my community get to know what it takes to get into Harvard, both the master's and the PhD program. I know the PhD may be even more competitive. But for students who are applying to the department, what would you say would perhaps distinguish the application from another? What elements would make them stand out and improve their chances of getting admission?
Yes, so I have to separate then the two types of master programs on the one hand, and then the PhD program on the other hand. We have two types of master, various forms, but a master of public health, which is the practitioner type of education. We have it both in person, very strongly, and also online in a so-called generalist approach. There, I think the main emphasis is of course on the background of the candidates, but also on their motivation. Why and where would you like, if you work in this area, where would you want to apply it? And I would focus very much, if I wanted to go into an MPH epidemiology or an MPH generalist or overall MPH, I would focus on that. In the Master of Science program, there, particularly at Harvard, a core emphasis is on methods. The methodology, epidemiologic methodology, quite specific actually for and influential in public health and in medicine at large. We focus very much on that. So if you can show that you not only have interest in that, perhaps worked in this already quite a bit, or have a particular plan to work in this in a context, that would really gives you a bigger chance. In our master programs, these are of course competitive, but there is a good chance too, if you have have the good background and the good motivation and the good skills already developed, there's a good chance to get in there. And the PhD program is much, much more, as you know, much more competitive. A proportion of our PhD program comes from those who had a master's in, particularly Master of Science, in various institutions, Hopkins, for example, but also in our own institution. And there, the competition is really very, very fierce. So you don't despair when there is not a positive answer. Try again. Try to build up the credentials in such a way that you have a bigger chance in that. For every candidate that we can accept and will accept, we will go on with our PhD program. Have seen that indeed some institutions have stopped with that. We don't do that. We continue. We give it a high priority in terms of how we fund our PhDs in our School of Public Health and certainly also in our Department of Epidemiology. But the odds to get in are, if you start, relatively low, I must admit that. But on the other hand, don't despair, as I say, and have a look again. Try to link up with a possible mentor early. Try also to define your area as best as you can, and then you have a good chance to get in there. So we invite all people who are listening now and think we want to go in epidemiology, and I hope many of you will do that because it's a wonderful field to work in. We invite everybody to apply.
Okay. So you did mention that, I mean, for the PhD, especially in Epi and other public health sciences, you need master's degree or most applicants usually have a master's degree. But some of the issues I've had is applicants asking me, how do institutions like, for example, Hopkins or Harvard, say Columbia, assess degrees from international institutions? So, for example, if someone has a master's from, say, Nigeria or Ghana, Master of Public Health, Epidemiology and Disease Control from Ghana or Nigeria, how is that assessed compared to someone with a master's from Harvard or a master's from Hopkins?
Yes. Well, it's done on a really detailed basis with interviews, with, of course, assessing what the coursework has been, what the individual has worked further on. I must say, in general, that is not really so difficult. You can generally find out what the comparison is, say, with a master's at Hopkins or so. And the quality of the candidate and the previous work of the candidate is the key thing. And the nationality, you can figure that generally out. There is one, of course, other thing here, and that is, I regret that as a non-citizen, but a permanent resident in the US, I would not be able to apply for a T32 place because you have to be a US citizen. And of course, training grants are very, very important for our PhD programs because that is, to a certain degree, the funding of those positions. That means there is a bend towards the US nationals in those programs. But at Harvard, we try to be very cognizant of that and try to see how international candidates from all continents, basically, how we can get them in, because we see this as a very, very important overall international, worldwide, global type of effort. And we see our program in that sense of playing an important role. So also there, I stimulate people to apply from various other countries than the US as well.
Okay, I think that's fair. And the element of publication, I know for the PhD, if you have publications, it's a good or it's positive sign that you're ready for the rigor at the PhD level. But for individuals, I mean, first of all, what would you say is the importance of having a publication? And for individuals who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to publish paper, what other signals would show that they are ready to survive the PhD training?
First of all, to underscore what you say, publications, of course, are a marker of previous work, generally also as a consequence, perhaps, of a master program, whether that is a master in public health or in master of science or in medicine. MDs coming, and we very often have few papers in that, and is a good sign, but it is not the only sign. And so if people can show, and that very often happens, that there is a keen interest, that they have plans developed, for example, in a master program or in another way, in a particular area of epidemiology, that may give them advantages over those that have quite a number of publications already. We do the admissions in epidemiology in particular areas. So we do it in cancer, we do it in our methods in clinical epidemiology, we in mental health epidemiology, so infectious disease, not to forget, that's one of the biggest, of course. So in those areas, when you have shown that you have a great development potential in there, that certainly is an opportunity, a possibility to get into a PhD program.
Okay. So having a publication is good, but if you don't have a publication and you have other experiences or work to show, that is also positive. Okay. I think one other area where applicants usually have problem with is cold emails or sending emails to faculty ahead of time before they apply. I know for some programs, maybe Hopkins is one. I'm also sure it may be the same for Harvard. If you're applying to their programs, cold emails may not necessarily improve your chances of getting admission. How true is that? What is the importance of cold email in applying to a program like maybe PhD, Epi at Harvard?
Well, I think it is important to, in one form or another, show interest, and so that in the direction you want to go. It is also important to try to link up with colleagues in a particular area that you're interested in. So, and that is not a matter of doing it in weeks. That can be a longer period. And so I advise always people as much as possible to try to link up, perhaps during a summer period, try to have a position for some time and see whether development can be linked to a certain colleague or group. And that is generally a very important way. In fact, that is also when you have your masters, a master, say Master of Science, wherever it's from, that link already exists. And that is therefore an advantage in being competitive for a PhD program.
Okay. I think that's good to know. The interview process, what elements, maybe admissions committee or the interview panel for students who are able to make it to the interview stage, what are they assessing during the interview? What do programs want to know before they say, okay, I think you are a good candidate for our PhD program?
Well, first of all, of course, the background, not only on paper, but also verbally, what their background is, how they have. And then the key element is, I would think, the enthusiasm on the one hand, and the expertise, the expert thinking about a particular epidemiologic or medical or public health problem. So that is being assessed during those interviews. And indeed, we have, for candidates that in the end are being selected, at least two, generally three interviews of various people in the admissions committee in various stages. We also invite them to our pre-meetings before we make the decisions in groups. And so indeed, showing that you are not only enthusiastic, which is a very important thing as well, but also have the expertise and the developed knowledge in a broad sense to go into a PhD is very important, a very important part of the whole process in our PhD programs. And I think that's elsewhere the case as well. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if maybe you have a number of head, but typically how many people get into the program? I know for my cohort, Hopkins received about 400, and then they ended up selecting, I think, 12 or 13. The number has since reduced last year. How the Harvard numbers looking like? How many in a cohort, for example, let's say PhD, Epi?
I discussed this with the previous chair, David Celentano at Hopkins, and it was quite remarkable how similar that was. We get at that time, about 500 applicants for about 15 positions. This year, maybe, I haven't seen the last numbers, but probably a bit less. But we will also probably accept something like 12 or so positions, yes. Yeah, so, but it's quite similar to what Hopkins was, and it completely developed independently.
So that certainly gives an idea about how competitive the program is. But in terms of, let's say, mentorship for those who get into the program, I know you've perhaps mentored several students pass through the PhD training. What would you say is the effective way to guide PhD students during their journey as, PhD students?
Yes, we at Harvard, since a number of years now, we have a so-called population health science stream in which epidemiology is a strong and the largest area, but also environmental health and social epidemiology is in there. And that gives, in the first year of a PhD, the coursework for particularly focusing on methods, epidemiologic and other quantitative methods. That is, I think, directly related to the instructors of those courses is the best way to go in there. Then there is a strong link as early as we can with a particular mentor, an advisor in the PhD dissertation work and this development of the aims of the dissertation. There we advise as early as possible in a typically, say, 4-year PhD program to have strong context with your advisor, with your mentor, with a group and people working on that. And that generally works really well. So people on the one hand are in an overall population health science stream, but on the other hand, they are specifically also in a department, in our case, in a Department of Epidemiology. So I always think of that as the best of two worlds. On the one hand, the overall population health science work, and on the other hand, specifically then epidemiology.
All right, thanks. I think we've exhausted most of our time. The last few minutes is mainly a fun session for people to get to know you more. So I call it rapid fire. You provide short answers to a series of short questions. So
Wow.
maybe the first one is a book you think every emerging public health leader should read.
I personally like Plagues and Peoples.
Okay.
This is William McNeill. Of course, this was particularly during the pandemic of a great interest, but it's a wonderful book. Also, the classic development of epidemiology, the history of epidemiology is so important. It's an history of ideas. And this is one of my favorite. This is from our colleague at Yale quite a number of years ago now. Yeah, it's good that I have them next to me here in my library so I can show those books. Very, very nice. I always try to advise people and suggest people and stimulate them to read a bit outside of their own direct interest in the epidemiology conceptual work. If you can, and that comes back to my background, this is not rapid fire anymore, but this is a long answer, I realize. But if you can find Theory of Epidemiology, that is a book by Olli Miettinen. If you can find that, Theoretical Epidemiology, I should say, that is, it's difficult, it's an enormously dense book and still very, very important, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those highlights. The second is you wake up tomorrow and you can instantly master a skill outside of public health. What would it be?
That's a very good. I would like to, more than I can do now, write in a way that is scientifically fully sound, but also attractive to people who are not directly in your own field and even in people who are outside of the field. So a kind of heavy journalistic approach combined with a strong scientific background. That type of skills I would develop a bit more in myself. I would like to have that.
Okay.
You hear now what I don't have.
Okay, what's one thing you believed early in your career, but now you no longer do?
That's a very good question, actually. Early in my career, believed, I think, very strongly that the individual approach to health problems is the dominant one. And I don't believe that anymore in such a strong force. I think now far more in terms of the integration of the more population approach and the individual approach, not one of the other, but the combination. This, of course, has to do with also you get out of a medical school with very much this individual, and that is, I think, I left that behind. Yeah. Also, if I may say, give you another one, was very impressed by one of our colleagues who said, yes, you know, if you want to change the world, perhaps start with one person. I think now much more in terms of trying to be responsible for all. We are all responsible for all. This is a quote of Dostoevsky, as you perhaps know, but it came to me through Professor Jeffrey Rose, the major towering cardiovascular epidemiologist from the London School of Hygiene. We are all responsible for all, and that I think is different from what I thought perhaps in 30, 40 years ago. Yes.
Okay. Coffee, tea, or something stronger in the morning?
Oh, coffee. Oh, coffee. Oh, not do without coffee.
Okay.
By the way, it's one of the things that has stood up nearly everything. There's hardly anything that can be said bad about coffee, isn't it, in terms of our environment?
Yeah, that's true. If you could have lunch with any public health leader, past or present, who would it be?
I think I would choose Jerome Kornfield. I would like to, perhaps in combination with Abe Lilienfeld. Lilienfeld and Kornfield in combination, I thought would be a brilliant. I met them both as a very, very young person, but having more extensive lunch, that would be wonderful, I think.
Okay. I said we have 2 more to go. I recently asked the Dean of Hopkins what's one thing about her that most people wouldn't guess from her CV. And she said she has a black belt in Taekwondo. So that was really surprising. So I think I get the same question to you is what's one thing about you most people wouldn't guess from your CV?
I am a boxing instructor.
Oh.
I have, yes, I don't have a black or whatever belt that you do in these cases, but I have for quite a number of years, first of course being taught and then do it myself, being an instructor on boxing. And so my neurological colleagues, of course, they don't believe that when they see it. And so we protect, of course, our heads very much. But yes, boxing is one of the things I like to do very much. It's one of the, for 2 reasons. Number one, you develop your skills and the cardiovascular fitness is enormous in that. But number 2, of the serious boxers that you meet, these people are really very nice. Contrary to what many people believe, they are very nice and they are in control because they know things can go wrong and if you do it wrong. So it's a very nice environment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on this episode. Before you go, maybe last words for our listeners, prospective applicants, current students, early career professionals in public health who are looking for inspiration on surviving this transition in our lifetime.
Well, keep on going. Keep the optimism that things will get better. Also, always remember when you're in epidemiology or in the broad sense, you are in a wonderful field and a superior way to spend your life in this. So please feel free to come and you will not be disappointed.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Khalifa. Thank you very, very much. Very enjoyable.